Your grandfather never read a self-help book about resilience. He did not need to. His job taught him everything he would ever need to know about pain, patience, and showing up when the work was thankless. There was a time when the labor itself was the lesson, when the thing that made a man tough was not a gym membership or a cold plunge. It was Tuesday morning. It was clocking in. These are 20 jobs that once built the kind of quiet, unshakable toughness you cannot fake. Every single one of them has disappeared. What replaced them does not teach the same lessons. Number 1. The iceman. Before electric refrigeration changed American kitchens forever, somebody had to keep food cold. That somebody was the iceman. In the winters of New England and the Great Lakes region, crews would saw massive blocks from frozen rivers and lakes, haul them into insulated storage houses, and then deliver them door to door through the brutal heat of summer. Families depended on him. If he didn't show up, the meat spoiled, the milk turned, and dinner was ruined. The job vanished almost overnight when General Electric started mass-producing household refrigerators in the 1930s. Number 2. The log driver. Before trucks and highways, the only way to move timber from remote forests to sawmills was by river. Log drivers would guide thousands of freshly cut trees downstream, standing on top of the rolling, shifting mass, with nothing but spiked boots and a long pike pole. The rivers of Maine, Wisconsin, and the Pacific Northwest were highways of raw lumber every spring. Men died doing this regularly. A single jam where logs stacked and locked against each other could create a wall of timber 40 feet high. Someone had to walk out onto that pile and free the key log. If he misjudged it, the whole thing came down on top of him. The last major log drive in the United States took place on the Kennebec River in Maine in 1976. Number 3. The gandy dancer. This was the man who laid and maintained railroad track by hand. Before mechanized equipment, every rail in America was aligned, leveled, and secured by crews of men swinging sledgehammers and prying steel with long iron bars. They worked in rhythm. A caller would sing or chant, and the crew would swing together on the beat. That rhythm was not for entertainment. It was a safety mechanism. If one man swung out of time, someone could lose a hand. The name likely came from the Gandy Manufacturing Company, which made many of the tools they used. These crews built the rail system that connected a continent, and most of them are completely forgotten. Number 4. The knocker-upper. Before alarm clocks were affordable, factory towns in England and parts of the American Northeast employed people to wake workers up for their shifts. The knocker-upper walked the dark streets before dawn, tapping on bedroom windows with a long bamboo stick, or shooting dried peas at the glass with a small tube. It sounds almost comical now, but missing a shift meant losing a day's wages, and losing a day's wages meant your family did not eat. The knocker-upper was essential infrastructure. The job disappeared gradually through the early 20th century as cheap alarm clocks flooded the market. Number 5. The breaker boy. The coal mines of Pennsylvania demanded something no child should have had to give. In mining towns across Pennsylvania and West Virginia, boys as young as 8 sat hunched over conveyor belts of raw coal, picking out slate, rock, and wood with their bare hands for 10 hours a day. The coal dust filled their lungs. Their fingers bled and sometimes broke. Supervisors walked behind them with switches to keep them from slowing down. By the time child labor laws finally caught up in the 1920s and the 1930s, Thousands of boys had already spent their childhoods in those breaker rooms. The toughness they built was not admirable. It was survival, and it cost them dearly. Number 6. The lamplighter. Every evening at dusk, the lamplighter walked his route through the city, carrying a small ladder and a wick on a pole, lighting each gas street lamp by hand. At dawn, he reversed the route and extinguished them. In cities like London, Paris, and New York, these men were as familiar as mailmen. They knew every street, every corner, every dark stretch that needed light. When electric street lamps arrived in the 1880s and the 1890s, the lamplighters fought to keep their jobs. Some cities kept them on for years out of tradition, but eventually, a switch on a wall replaced a man with a ladder. Number 7. The pinsetter. Before automatic machines took over, every bowling alley employed boys and young men who sat in the pit at the end of the lane, dodging flying pins, resetting them by hand, and rolling the ball back to the bowler. It was fast, dangerous, and loud. A pin thrown at speed could crack a rib or split a lip. Most pinsetters worked evenings and weekends for pocket change. The AMF automatic pinsetter, introduced in 1946, made the job obsolete within a decade. But for a generation of young men, the bowling alley pit was where they earned their first dollar and their first bruise. But if the bowling alley pit sounds rough, the next job sent men somewhere far worse. Number 8. The rat catcher. Victorian cities were overrun with rats. Not the kind you occasionally spot near a dumpster. They came by the thousands, spreading disease through densely packed neighborhoods. The rat catcher went into sewers, basements, and crawl spaces with terrier dogs and bare hands. Jack Black, the most famous rat catcher in London, was appointed to the position by Queen Victoria herself. He caught rats alive, bred unusual colors, and sold them as pets. But most rat catchers worked in filth and darkness, inhaling fumes and risking bites that could carry plague. The job faded as modern sanitation and pest control chemicals arrived in the early 20th century. Number 9. The hod carrier. On every major construction site, before cranes and forklifts, there was the hod carrier. He hauled bricks, mortar, and stone up ladders in a V-shaped wooden trough, balanced on his shoulder. A loaded hod weighed anywhere from 40 to 80 pounds. He climbed all day, up scaffolding that swayed in the wind, on ladders that were often just 2 boards nailed to a frame. The bricklayers got the credit. The hod carrier got the back problems. The job largely disappeared with the mechanization of construction in the mid-20th century, but the buildings he helped raise are still standing. Number 10. The powder monkey. In mining operations and on warships, someone had to carry the gunpowder. That person was usually a boy. Powder monkeys carried explosive charges from the magazine to the guns during naval battles, and they carried blasting powder deep into mine shafts for demolition crews. Speed was essential. Hesitation was deadly. On warships during the age of sail, a direct hit to a powder monkey's position could ignite everything he was carrying. The term dates back to the 17th century, and the role persisted well into the industrial age, before safer explosives and mechanical loading systems finally replaced the need for a human courier. Number 11. The telegraph operator. For nearly a century, the fastest way to send a message across the country was a man sitting in a small office, tapping out Morse code on a brass key. Telegraph operators connected businesses, delivered war dispatches, and transmitted the news that shaped public opinion. During the Civil War, operators worked under fire, tapping out troop movements while bullets hit the walls around them. The job required intense concentration, a trained ear, and nerves that did not rattle. The telephone made the telegraph redundant by the early 20th century. The last commercial telegram in the United States was sent by Western Union in 2006. Number 12. The puddler. Before the Bessemer process revolutionized steelmaking, someone had to stand in front of a white-hot furnace and stir molten iron with a long rod until the carbon burned off. That was the puddler. The heat was extraordinary. Men worked in shifts measured in minutes, not hours, because the temperature near the furnace could exceed 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Puddlers developed massive upper bodies from the constant stirring, and they were known for their endurance and their short lifespans. The Bessemer converter, patented in 1856, made the puddler's job unnecessary within a few decades. Number 13. The lector. In cigar factories across Cuba and later in Tampa, Florida, a man sat on an elevated chair and read aloud to the workers below, newspapers in the morning, novels in the afternoon, political tracts whenever the mood called for it. The lector was chosen by the workers themselves and paid from their own wages. He read Tolstoy, Dickens, and Marx to rooms full of people rolling cigars by hand. A man whose only tool was his voice held more influence over that factory floor than the owner who signed the checks. Factory owners eventually banned the practice because they believed it was radicalizing the workforce. When machines replaced hand-rolling, the lector lost both his audience and his chair. Number 14. The sandwich board man. Before digital billboards and social media ads, businesses hired men to strap wooden signboards to their chests and backs and walk the busiest streets in town. Rain, snow, blistering heat. The sandwich board man stood on corners and paced sidewalks for hours. It was considered one of the lowest forms of employment. Charles Dickens wrote about them with a mix of pity and admiration. The men who did it were often desperate for work and willing to endure public indifference for a few coins. The job slowly faded as printed advertising, and eventually electronic media made human billboards unnecessary. Number 15. The leech collector. For centuries, European medicine relied heavily on bloodletting, and the preferred tool was the medicinal leech. Someone had to go into the swamps and marshes and collect them. Leech collectors waded barefoot into stagnant water and waited for the creatures to attach to their legs. Once enough leeches had latched on, the collector would peel them off and deposit them in jars for sale to physicians and apothecaries. The work was miserable, cold, and carried a constant risk of infection. As medical science advanced past bloodletting in the mid-19th century, the demand for leeches dropped sharply, and the collectors disappeared with it. Number 16. The resurrectionist. Medical schools in the 18th and 19th centuries needed cadavers for anatomy lessons, but the legal supply was almost non-existent. Enter the resurrectionist, a man who dug up freshly buried bodies under cover of darkness and sold them to surgeons. It was illegal, ghoulish, and extremely profitable. In Edinburgh, Burke and Hare famously skipped the digging part and started creating their own supply through murder. The Anatomy Act of 1832 in Britain finally provided legal channels for obtaining bodies, and the resurrectionist trade dried up. But for a century, medical progress walked hand in hand with men who carried shovels through graveyards at midnight. Number 17. The fuller. Before industrial textile processing, raw cloth had to be cleaned, thickened, and softened by hand. The fuller did this by stomping on wet fabric in large wooden troughs, sometimes for hours at a time. The process used a type of calcium-rich clay called fuller's earth, which absorbed grease and impurities. It was monotonous, physically demanding, and absolutely essential to the textile trade. Fulling mills, powered first by water and later by steam, replaced human feet with mechanical hammers. The surname Fuller, along with Tucker and Walker, survives as a permanent reminder of a job that shaped entire communities. Number 18. The riveter. Before welding became standard in structural steel construction, every beam and column was joined by rivets. A team of 4 men worked together. One heated the rivet in a portable forge until it glowed orange. Another caught it in a metal bucket, often thrown across open air. A third held it in place with a heavy bar, and the fourth hammered it flat with a pneumatic gun. On projects like the Empire State Building and the Golden Gate Bridge, riveters worked hundreds of feet above the ground with no safety harnesses. 12 men died building the Golden Gate. 5 died on the Empire State Building. The riveter's craft was replaced by arc welding in the decades after World War II, but the skylines they built define every major American city. Number 19. The milkman. He arrived before sunrise. Glass bottles clinked in a wire carrier, left on your front porch before anyone in the house was awake. The milkman was a fixture of American and British domestic life from the late 1800s through the 1960s. He knew every family on his route. He knew who had a new baby, who was away on vacation, who left an extra note asking for cream. The rise of home refrigeration and the growth of supermarket chains made doorstep delivery unnecessary. The milkman did not disappear because he failed. He disappeared because the world stopped needing what he offered, and something small and human went with him. Number 20. The switchboard operator. Before direct dial telephones, every phone call was connected by hand. The switchboard operator sat before a wall of jacks and plugs, physically connecting one caller to another by inserting a cord into the right socket. During emergencies, these operators became lifelines. In 1947, during the Texas City disaster, switchboard operators stayed at their posts, relaying emergency calls while the explosion's shockwave shattered the windows around them. The job required patience, precision, and the ability to stay calm when the board lit up with dozens of calls at once. Automatic switching systems made the role obsolete by the 1980s, but for decades, the voice on the other end of the line was the first thing you heard when you picked up the phone. From the frozen lakes of New England to the steel beams above Manhattan, those are the 20. Some of these jobs were noble. Some were brutal. A few were both at the same time. But every single one of them asked something real from the people who did them. Not engagement, not productivity metrics, but something harder to name and harder to fake. The world that replaced these jobs is more comfortable. That is not in question. But comfort has a way of quietly removing the things that used to teach people what they were made of. If you are still here, you probably already know that. Subscribe if you want more like this. And if one of these jobs reminded you of a story your grandfather told, I would like to hear it in the comments.